Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read at 1699 Louis Satcher, Wayside School, Chapter 1. Mrs. Golf. Mrs. Golf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. If you children are bad, she warned. Or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Mrs. Golf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count, but he knew that if he answered the problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Mrs. Golf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Golf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. Hey, that isn't fair, said Todd. John was only trying to help a friend. Mrs. Golf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. Does anybody else have an opinion? She asked. Nobody else said a word. Miss Golf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. I don't allow crying in the classroom, said Mrs. Golf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet. And when they went home, they were too scared even to talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Mrs. Golf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where the children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Mrs. Golf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, "God bless you." When Paul sneezed, Miss Golf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Terence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Marisha tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Mrs. Golf's right ear began to wiggle. When she reached the door, Mrs. Golf's left ear wiggled. Marisha opened the door and had one foot outside. When Mrs. Golf stuck out her tongue, Marisha became an apple. Mrs. Golf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Golf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. 3 Erics left. They were turned into apples. Mrs. Golf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terence, Marisha, and the 3 Erics. Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Oven. Louis, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Mrs. Golf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Golf's desk. I must be wrong. She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples. He walked back down to the playground. The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Louis, the yard teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Golf's desk. There were only 3 children left in the class. She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all of children were apples. Mrs. Golf was very happy. Now I can go home. I don't have to teach anymore. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. You're not going anywhere, shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Mrs. Golf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed. Mrs. Golf fell on the floor. The apples jumped all over her. Stop. Oh, I'll turn you into applesauce, but the apples didn't stop. Said, and Mrs. Golf could do nothing about it. Turn us back into children, Todd demanded. Mrs. Golf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, Wiggle the ear. This time her left one first, then her right. Turn the apples back into children. All right, said Marisha. Let's go get Louis. He'll know what to do. No, screamed Mrs. Goff. I'll turn you back into apple. She wiggled her ears, frozen and struck out. But Jenny held up a mirror. Mrs. Goff turned herself into an apple. Children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher, even though Mrs. Goff was mean. They didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple, but none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. Where's Mrs. Goff? He asked. Nobody said a word. Boy, am I hungry, said Louis. I don't think Mrs. Goff would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many. He picked up the apple, which was really Mrs. Goff, shined it up on his shirt, and ate it. Chapter 2, Mrs. Jules. Mrs. Jules had a terrible nice face. She stood at the bottom of Wayside School and looked up. She was supposed to teach the class on the 30th story. The children on the 30th story were scared. They had never told anybody what had happened to Mrs. Goff. They hadn't had a teacher for 3 days. They were afraid of what the new teacher would be like. They had heard she would be a terribly nice teacher. They had never had a nice teacher. They were terribly afraid of nice teacher. Mrs. Jules walked up the winding, creaking staircase to the 30th story. She was also afraid. She was afraid of the children. She had heard that they would be horribly cute children. She had never taught cute children. She was horribly afraid of cute children. She opened the door to the classroom. She was terribly nice. The children could tell just by looking at her. Mrs. Jules looked at the children. They were horribly cute. In fact, they were much too cute to be children. I don't believe it, said Miss Jules. It's a room full of monkeys. Children looked at each other. They didn't see any monkeys. This is ridiculous, said Mrs. Jules. Just ridiculous. I walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing but a class of monkeys. What do they think I am? I'm a teacher, not a zookeeper. The children looked at her. They didn't know what to do, what to say. Todd scratched his head. Oh, I'm sorry, said Mrs. Jules. Please don't get me wrong. I have nothing against monkeys. It is just that I was expecting children. I like monkeys. I really do. Why? I'm sure we can play all kinds of monkey games. What are you talking about? Asked Todd. Miss Jules nearly fell off her chair. Well, what do you know? A talking monkey? Tomorrow I'll bring you a banana. My name is Todd, said Todd. The children were flabbergasted. They all raised their hands. I'm sorry, said Mrs. Jules, but I don't have enough banana for all of you. I didn't expect this. Next week I'll bring in a whole bushel. I don't want a banana, said Calvin. I'm not a monkey. Would you like a peanut? Asked Mrs. Jules. I think I might have a bag of peanuts in my purse. Wait a second. Yes, here it is. Thanks, said Calvin. Calvin liked peanuts. Allison stood up. I'm not a monkey, she said. I'm a girl. My name is Allison. And so is everybody else. Mrs. Jules was shocked. Do you mean to tell me that every monkey in here is named Allison? No, said Jenny. She means we are all children. My name is Jenny. No, you are much too cute to be children. Jason raised his hand. Yes, the chimpanzee in the red shirt. My name is Jason, said Jason, and I'm not a chimpanzee. You're too small to be a gorilla, said Miss Jewel. I'm a boy. You're not a monkey? No. And the rest of the class, they are not monkeys either? No. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Are you sure? We'd know if we were monkeys, wouldn't we? I don't know. Do monkeys know that they are monkeys? I don't know. I'm not a monkey. No, I suppose you're not. Okay, in that case, we have a lot of work to do. Reading, writing, subtraction, addition, spelling. Everybody take out a piece of paper. We'll have a test now. Jason tapped Todd on the shoulder. He said, do you want to know something? I liked it better when she thought we were monkeys. I know. I guess now it means she won't bring me banana. There will be no talking in class, said Miss Jewel. She wrote Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Chapter 3, Joe. Joe had curly hair, but he didn't know how much hair he had. He couldn't count that high. In fact, he couldn't count at all. When all of the other children went to recess, Mrs. Jules told Joe to wait inside. Joe, she said, how much hair do you have? Joe shrugged his shoulders. A lot, he answered. But how much, Joe? asked Mrs. Jewell. Enough to cover my head, Joe answered. Joe, you're gonna have to learn how to count, said Mrs. Jewell. But Mrs. George, I already know how to count, said Joe. Let me go to recess. First count to 10. 6, 8, 12, 1, 5, 2, 7, 8, 3, 10. No, Joe, that's wrong, said Mrs. Joel. No, it isn't. I counted until I got to 10, but you are wrong. I'll prove it to you. She put 5 pencils on his desk. How many pencils do we have here, Joe? Joe counted the pencil. 4, 6, 1, 9, 5. There are 5 pencils. That's wrong. How many pencils are there? 5. That's what I said. May I go to recess now? No. You got the right answer, but you counted the wrong way. You are just lucky. She said 8 potatoes on his desk. How many potatoes, Joe? 7, 5, 3, 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 8 potatoes, Mrs. Joe. No, there are 8, said Miss Joe. But that's what I said. May I go to recess now? No, you got the right answer, but you counted the wrong way again. She put 3 books on his desk. Count the books, Joe. Joe counted the books. 1,000, 1,000,000, 3. 3, Mrs. Jewell. Correct, said Miss Joe. May I go to recess now, Joe? No, said Mrs. Joe. May I have a potato? No, listen to me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now you say it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Very good. Put 6 erasers on it. Now count the eraser, Joe. Put away just the way I showed you. Joe counted the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10, Mrs. Joe. No. Didn't I count right? Yeah, you counted right, but you got the wrong answer, said. This doesn't make any sense. When I counted the wrong, I get the right answer. When I count right, I get the wrong answer. Hit her head against the wall 5 times. How many times did I hit my head against the wall? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You hit your head against the wall 10 times. No. 4, 6, 1, 9, 5. You hit your head 5 times, said though. Shook her head though and said, yes, that is right. The bell rang, and all the other children came back from recess. Fresh air had made them very excited. They were laughing and shouting. Oh, darn it, said Joe. Now I missed recess. Hey, Joe, where were you? Asked John. You missed a great game of kickball. I kicked the home run, said Todd. What was wrong with you, Joe? Asked Joey. Nothing. Mrs. Joel was just trying to teach me how to count, Joey laughed. You mean you don't know how to count? Counting is easy, said Mauricia. Now, Mrs. Joel. What is easy for you may not be easy for Joe, and what's easy for Joe may not be easy for you. Nothing is easy for Joe, said Mauricia. He's stupid. I can beat you up, said Joe. Try it, said Mauricia. That'll be enough of that, said Mrs. Joel. She wrote Mauricia's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Joe put his head on his desk between the 8 potatoes and the 6 erasers. Don't feel bad, Joe, said Miss Joel. I just don't get it. I never learned how to count. Sure you will, Joe, said Miss Joel. One day it'll just come to you. You'll wake up one morning and suddenly be able to count, Joe asked. If all I have to do is wake up, what am I going to school for? School just speeds things up, said Mrs. Jewell. Without school, it might take another 70 years before you wake up and are able to count. By that time, I may have no hair left on top of my head to count. Exactly. That's why you go to school. When Joe woke up the next day, he knew how to count. He had 55,006 hairs on his head. They were all curly. Chapter 4. Sherry. Sherry had long eyelashes. She weighed only 49 pounds. She always wore a big red and blue overcoat with a hood. The overcoat weighed 35 pounds. The red part weighed 15 pounds. The blue part weighed 15 pounds. And the hood weighed 5 pounds. Her eyelashes weighed 1.5 pounds. She sat next to the window in Mrs. Jewell's class. She spent a lot of time just staring out the window. Mrs. Jules didn't mind. Mrs. Jules said that a lot of people learn best when they stare out a window. Sherry often fell asleep in class. Mrs. Jules didn't mind that either. She said that a lot of people do their best learning when they are asleep. Sherry spent all of her time either looking out the window or sleeping. Mrs. Jules thought she was the best student in the class. One afternoon, it was very hot. All of the windows were open, yet Sherry still wore a red and blue overcoat. The heat made her very tired. Miss Jules was teaching arithmetic. Sherry pulled the hood up over her face, buried herself in the coat, and went to sleep. Mrs. Jules, said Kathy, Sherry's asleep. That's good. She must be learning something. Mrs. Jules continued with the lesson. Sherry began to snore. Mrs. Jules, Sherry's snoring, said Kathy. Yes, I can hear that. She must be learning an awful lot today. I wish the rest of you could be like her. Sherry began to toss and turn. She flopped over on top of her desk, then rolled over on top of Kathy's desk. Then she rolled back the other way. Kathy screamed. Sherry rolled out the window. She was still sound asleep. As you know, Mrs. Jules' class was on the 30th story of Wayside School, so Sherry had a long way to go. After she had fallen 10 stories, Sherry woke up. She looked around. She was confused. She wasn't in Mrs. Jules' class, and she wasn't at home in bed. She couldn't figure out where she was. She yawned, pulled the hood back over her eyes, and went back to sleep. By the time she had fallen another 10 stories, Wayside School had an exceptionally large playground. Louise, the yard teacher, was way over the other side of it when it happened to see Sherry fall out the window. He ducked under the volleyball net, hauled past the kickball field, hopped over the hopscotch court, climbed through the monkey bar, and sped across the grass, and caught it just before she hit the ground. The people in Mrs. Jewel's class cheered. Sherry woke up in Louis' arm. Darn it, Louis, where did you go and wake me up for? I'm sorry, Sherry, said Louis. I'm sorry, Sherry repeated. Is that all you can say? I was having a wonderful dream until you woke me up. You're always bothering me, Louis. I can't stand it, she laughed and hugged him around the neck. Louis carried her back up 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' room. That evening, when Sherry went to bed, she was unable to fall asleep. She just wasn't tired. Chapter 5. Todd. All of the children in Mrs. Jules' class, except Todd, were talking and carrying on. Todd was thinking. Todd always thought before he spoke. When he got an idea, his eyes lit up. Todd finished thinking and began to speak. But before he said 2 words, Mrs. Jules called him. Todd, she said, you know better than to talk in class. You must learn to work quietly. Like the other children, she wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd looked around in amazement. All of the other children, who had been talking and screaming and fighting only seconds later, were quietly working in their workbooks. Todd scratched his head. A child was given 3 chances in Mrs. Jules' class. The first time he did something wrong, Mrs. Jules wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. The second time he did something wrong, she put a check mark next to his name, and the third time he did something wrong, she circled his name. Todd reached into his desk and pulled out his workbook. He had only just studied on it. When he felt someone tap him on the shoulder, it was Joy. What page are you on? Joy asked. Page 4, Todd whispered. I'm on page 11, said Joy. Todd didn't say anything. He didn't want to get into trouble. He just went back to work. 5 minutes later, Joy tapped him again. Todd ignored her. So Joy picked him in the back with a pencil. Todd pretended he didn't notice. Joy got up from a seat and sharpened the pencil. She came back and poked it in Todd's bag. What page are you on? She asked. Page 5. Boy, are you dumb? I'm on page 29. It isn't a race. Todd whispered. 5 minutes later, Joy pulled Todd's hair and didn't let go until he turned around. What page are you on? She demanded. Page 6. Todd answered, and quietly as he could. I'm on page 200, Joy shouted. Todd was very angry. Will you please let me do my work and stop bothering me? Mrs. Jules heard him. Todd, what did I say about talking in class? Todd scratched his head. Mrs. Jules put a check next to Todd's name on the book blackboard under the word discipline. Todd really tried to be good. He knew that if he talked one more time, Mrs. Jules would circle his name. Then he would have to go home early at 12 o'clock on the kindergarten bus, just as he had the day before and the day before that. In fact, there hadn't been a day since Mrs. Jules took over the class that she didn't send Todd home early. She said she did it for his own good. The other children went home at 2 o'clock. Todd wasn't really bad. He just always got caught. He really wanted to stay past 12 o'clock. He wanted to find out what the class did from 12 to 2, but it didn't look as though this was going to be his day. It was only 10:30 and he already had 2 strikes against him. He sealed his lips and went back to work. There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Jules opened it. 2 men stepped in, wearing masks and holding guns. Give us all your money, they demanded. All I have is a nickel. I have a dime. I have 13 cents. I have 4 cents, said Damien. What kind of bank is this? Asked one of the robbers. It's not a bank, it's a school, said Todd. Can't you read? No, said Roberts. Neither can I, said Todd. Do you mean we walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing? Don't you have anything valuable? Todd's eyes lit up. We sure do. We have knowledge. He grabbed Joy's workbook and gave it to the robber. Knowledge is much more valuable than money. Thanks, kid, said one of the robbers. Maybe I'll give up being a criminal and become a scientist, said the other. They left the room without hurting anybody. Now, I don't have a workbook, complained Joy. Miss Jules gave her a new one. Joy had to start all the way back at the beginning. Hey, Joy, what page are you on? Asked Todd. Page 1, Joy sighed. I'm on page 8, laughed Todd triumphantly. Mrs. Jules heard him. She circled his name. Todd had 3 strikes against him. At 12 o'clock, he left the room to go home early. It was like a star baseball player leaving the field. All the children stood up, clapped their hands, and whistled. Todd just scratched his head. Chapter 6, Bebe. Bebe was a girl with short brown hair, a little BB nose, totally tiny toes, and big brown eyes. Her full name was Bebe Goon. She was the fastest drawer in Mrs. Jewell's class. She could draw a cat in less than 45 seconds, a dog in less than 30, and a flower in less than 8 seconds. But of course, Bebe never drew just one dog or one cat or one flower. Art was from 12:30 to 1:30. Why, in that time, she could draw 50 cats, 100 flowers, 20 dogs, and several eggs or watermelon. It took her the same amount of time to draw a watermelon as an egg. Calvin sat next to Bebe. He didn't think he was very good at art. Why, it took him the whole period just to draw one airplane. So instead, he just helped Bebe. He was Bebe's assistant. As soon as Bebe would finish one masterpiece, Calvin would take it from her and set down a clean sheet of paper. Whenever her crayon ran low, Calvin was ready with a new crayon. That way, Bebe didn't have to waste any time, and in return, Bebe would draw 5 or 6 airplanes for Calvin. It was 12:30, time for art. Bebe was ready. On her desk was a sheet of yellow construction paper. In her hand was a green crayon. Calvin was ready. He held a stack of paper and a box of crayon. Ready, Bebe? Said Calvin. Ready, Calvin? Said Bebe. Okay, said Miss Jewel. Time for art. She had hardly finished the sentence when Bebe had already drawn a picture of a leaf. Calvin took it from her and put another piece of paper down. Red, called Bebe. Calvin handed Bebe a red crayon. Blue, called Bebe. He gave her a blue crayon. They were quite a pair. The teamwork was remarkable. Bebe drew pictures as fast as Calvin could, pick up the old paper and set down the new fish, an apple, three cherries, bing, bing, bing. At 1:30, Mrs. Jules announced, "Okay, class, art is over." Bebe dropped the crayon and fell over on her desk. Kelvin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He could hardly move. They had broken the old record. Bebe had drawn 378 pictures. They lay in a pile on Kelvin's desk. Mrs. Jules walked by. "Kelvin, did you draw all these pictures?" Kelvin laughed. "No, I can't draw." Bebe drew them all. "Well, then what did you draw?" asked Mrs. Jules. "I didn't draw anything," said Kelvin. "Why not? Don't you like art?" asked Mrs. Jules. "I love art. That's why I didn't draw anything." Miss Jules did not understand. It would have taken me the whole period just to draw one picture. Bebe would only have been able to draw 100 pictures, but with the two of us working together, she was able to draw 378 pictures. That's a lot more art. Bebe and Kelvin shook hands. "No, that isn't how you measure art. It isn't how many pictures you have, but how good the pictures are. Why, a person could spend his whole life just drawing one picture of a cat. In the time, I'm sure Bebe could draw 1,000,000 cats." 2,000,000, said Bebe. Miss Jo continued, "But if that one picture is better than each of Bebe's 2,000,000, then that person has produced more art than Bebe." Bebe looked as if she was going to cry. She picked up all the pictures from Kevin's desk and threw them in the garbage. Then she ran from the room. "I thought the pictures were good," said Kevin. Reached into garbage pail and took out a crumpled up picture of an airplane. Bebe walked outside into the playground. "Louis, the art teacher spotted her." "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm going home to draw a picture of a cat." "Will you bring it to school and show it to me tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? By tomorrow, I doubt if I'll even be finished with one whisker." Chapter 7. Calvin. Calvin had a big round face. "Calvin," said Mrs. Jewell, "I want you to take this note to Miss Jarbs for me." "Miss Jarbs?" asked Calvin. "Yes, Miss Jarbs," said Miss Jewell. "You know where she is, don't you?" "Yes," said Calvin. "She's on the 19th story." "That's right, Calvin," said Mrs. Jewell. "Take it to her." Calvin didn't move. "Well, what are you waiting for?" asked Mrs. Jewell. "She's on the 9th story," said Calvin. "Yes, we have already established the fact." 19th story, Calvin repeated. "Yes, Calvin, the 19th story." "Now take it to her before I lose my patience." "But Mrs. Jewell." "Now, Calvin, unless you'd rather go home on the kindergarten bus." "Yes, ma'am." Slowly he walked out the door. "Ha ha ha," laughed Terence. "Take it to the 9th story." "Give it to Miss Jarves." "Hooted Myron. Have fun on the 19th story," called Jason. Calvin stood outside the door to the classroom. He didn't know where to go. As you know, where the builder built Wayside School, he accidentally built it sideways. But he also forgot to build the 19th story. He built the 18th and the 20th, but no 19th. He said he was very sorry. There was also no Miss Jarves. Miss Jarves taught the class on the 19th story. Since there was no 19th story, there was no Miss Jarves. And besides that, as if Calvin didn't have enough problem, there was no note. Mr. Jules had never given Calvin the note. "Boy, this is just great," thought Calvin. "Just great. I'm supposed to take a note that I don't have to a teacher who doesn't exist and who teaches on a story that was never built." He didn't know what to do. He walked down to the 18th story, then back up to 20, then back down 18 and back up again to 20. There was no 19th story. There never was a 19th story, and there never will be a 19th story. Gary walked down to the administration office. He decided to put the note in Mrs. Jarvis' mailbox, but there wasn't one of those either. That didn't bother Calvin too much, however, since he didn't have a note. He looked out the window, saw Louis, the art teacher, shooting basket. Louis will know what to do, he thought. Calvin went outside. "Hey, Louis." Calvin called. Hi, Calvin, said Louis. He tossed him the basketball. Calvin dribbled up, took a shot. He missed Louis, tipped it. Do you want to play a game? Louis asked. I don't have time, said Calvin. I have to deliver a note to Mrs. Jarvis up on the 19th story. Then what are you doing all the way down here? There is no 19th story, said Calvin. Then where is Miss Jarvis? There is no Miss Jarvis. What are you going to do with the note? There is no. I understand. That's good. Because I sure don't. It's very simple. You're not supposed to take no notes to no teacher. You already haven't done it. Calvin still didn't understand. I'll just have to tell Mrs. Jules that I couldn't deliver the note. He said, that's good. The truth is always bad. Besides, I don't think I understand what I said either. Calvin walked back up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' class. Thank you very much, Calvin, said Miss Jules. There was a very important note, and I'm glad I was able to count on you. Yes, but you see, you delivered the note to Miss Jarvis on the 19th story, asked Jason. How did you do it? What do you mean, how did he do it? He gave Miss Jarvis the note. Some people, Jason, are responsible. But you see, Mrs. Jules, the note was very important. I told Miss Jarvis not to meet me for lunch. Don't worry, she won. Good. I have a coffee can full of Tootsie Roll Pops on my desk. You may help yourself to one for being such a good messenger. Thanks, but really, it was nothing. The end.